we risk losing the context of what made so many video games feel so special. During the prime years, stepping into an arcade was like stepping out of time into a technological parallel universe. It was in these environments that video games thrived and video games were alive. The bright lights and the dim ambience, coins clanking as they convert into credits, nearby pinball machines battering carbon steel, the classic titles with their unforgettable beeps and boops, the never-ending loop of the Daytona machine's greatest hit, and every mix of emotion constantly in flux from the people around you as they try, succeed, fail, and try again. This is just a small fraction of what was needed in order to play some of these games at their peak in the way that they were meant to be played. Every generation of arcade had its own individuality, ever since the late 1930s when the first few coin-operated pinball machines were created. Today, we'll be taking a look at primarily the late 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, and 5 reasons for why these arcades were so special, so unforgettable, and something that I think about even to this day. Number 1. Arcades were like stepping into the future. Arcades are where the real games thrived. Arcades were not an everyday treat. You'd have to find a way to get there, you'd have to have money, and you might even need parental supervision. All of this built into the anticipation and excitement for when you were finally able to go. When you finally got to the arcade, not only were you in a technological paradise, but a technological paradise of the future. Stepping into the arcade was like stepping into a land where you now had access to the next console generation's variety of games. Every leading video game developer was pouring money into research and development in order to achieve the bleeding edge of technological experiences that could not be found anywhere else. Advancements were made on a yearly basis. What you saw in the arcade could not be replicated at home, and you always knew that. It would be a celebration if a home console port of a game could even get close to the original arcade quality. Games like Heavy Barrel, Bad Dudes, Double Dragon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Gauntlet, and Smash TV all had home versions, and some of them were pretty good, but the real versions were always in the arcade. We should talk about polygons. When Star Fox was released on Super Nintendo back in 1993 and Stunt Race FX in 1994, while that was cutting edge for what could be done at home, it felt held back and didn't even compare to what arcades were doing. While home consoles strained, titles like 1993's Virtua Fighter did not feel held back at all by the technology in the arcade. 1994's Daytona USA brought a NASCAR-like thrill with graphics that hardly seemed possible. These experiences were pure arcade experiences, and they were amazing. In the 1990s, when I was able to fully enjoy arcades, even the classic titles like 1978's Space Invaders, 1980's Pac-Man and Centipede, 1981's Defender and Donkey Kong, and 1982's Zaxxon were never fully recreated at home, despite these games being considered the old games amongst us children. Playing them would still bring about a unique experience that you could not get anywhere else. Even ports on later systems were never the real thing. These games were still so cool to be able to play in the arcade. Number 2. Arcade games had an attraction level experience that could not be replicated. The best version of 1987's Afterburner had this giant wooden sit-down cabinet that would move with you as you flew a jet plane, blasting you with bass to replicate the feel of taking down enemies under intense fire. A spiritual successor in 1990, G-Lock, had this variation that would literally spin you around and upside down with a full 360 degrees of movement. I have not seen anything like that since. 1995's Virtual On Cyber Troopers had cockpits with twin sticks that would allow you to battle in one-on-one mech fights. Games like 2002's House of the Dead 3 featured light guns with real heft that would snap and provide feedback as you mowed down enemies. 2003's Outrun 2 had these great-looking Ferrari seats that could fit two people that would move back and forth with you in front of a giant screen. We can't forget the music games either. Dance Dance Revolution's popularity took off in the 2000s, breathing a last bit of life into classic arcades and brought about a new way to move and have fun, and get a lot of great exercise as well. With the mechanics behind these games, it ensured that the arcade experience always brought something new and interesting that you could not replicate at home through any sort of normal means. Even less outlandish games would often have custom controls, like 1984's Marble Madness with the trackball, 1985's Paperboy with its handlebar controller, or 1986's Arkanoid with its wheel. Even the joysticks in your standard cabinets felt unique. Home joysticks that could be purchased separately, like Nintendo's NES Advantage, did not feel nearly as snappy. Every game felt, to some degree, unique. Number 3. Cooperative gaming built ad hoc relationships with strangers where you would desperately fight for the same common good. 1989's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1991's The Simpsons and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Time, and 1992's X-Men were prolific cooperative beat-em-up games. To set the stage for this topic, we need to establish how people went to the arcades, particularly kids. When you went to the arcade, you were given some money. If you were in the US, you may receive $5 in bills. You'd take your dollar bills to the coin change machine for either actual money, such as quarters, or tokens. You probably already knew if you would be able to weasel any more money out of your parents and had your strategies locked and loaded. These quarters or tokens that you had granted you a limited number of credits across the arcade. For the US, most games varied between 25 cents to 50 cents, depending on how the arcade owner set up the games and how greedy they were, while big attraction style games could cost up to $1, if not more. Throughout your entire stay at the arcade, this limitation on how many games you could play ever weighed on your mind, driving you to make the most strategic decisions in regards to which games you played and making sure that every credit that you used counted. It pushed you to always do your best in every game because there was nothing that burned more than a lost credit due to sloppy play. These beat 'em ups allowed you to step into the future, as we've talked about, and come together with others to take down games that you would never see elsewhere like this. The Turtles games and Simpsons allowed 4 players, while X-Men allowed up to 6. The culture existed where someone would start a game at some point, and then the game would just thrive. Others may come and go. People would just randomly walk up and potentially join the effort at any time. These games were the cutting edge, particularly when they were first released, and would always attract many players and onlookers. Sometimes you could momentarily form such strong bonds with people you have known for only seconds. Your shared dedication in bringing this machine down and seeing as much of the content as possible built a type of camaraderie I have never seen before. Everyone would be trying their best to make their lives last, and these are the only games where I would see strangers occasionally give each other credits because the emotional bond that was formed so instantaneously was so strong that the kids would want to make the journey together, fighting side by side, even though typically none of the kids had that much money to put into the machine in the first place. These games were made to be played together with the psychological pressure of having only a limited number of tries while teaming up with others that are in the same boat as you. Number 4, fighting games brought about a new style of competitive gaming. It cannot be understated how prolific 1991's Street Fighter II was for the arcade. While fighting games are not typically treated as AAA culture-level experiences today, they were with the impact of Street Fighter II. The game was accessible. Characters moved in the way that you would expect. You could play with skill without having to memorize complex systems and special meters. There was some allowance for button mashing, and it challenged gamers in not just a test of mechanical skill, but psychological warfare as well. The moveset of all characters was known, and nothing was hidden, and all aspects of the match were in plain sight. Street Fighter II was followed up by various upgraded versions, as well as other fighting titles such as 1993's Mortal Kombat 2, 1994's Tekken, 1995's Soul Edge, and 1998's Marvel vs. Capcom. You cannot replicate the arcade experience of these games at home playing against someone else, even if you have online play with perfect internet connections. I say this today where there are arcade perfect versions of these games where you could play them in this fashion. The feeling is just not there. When these games hit the arcade on busy nights, lines would form behind these machines. This was a cultural level event, similar to how when the Wii came out, everyone had an opinion on Wii Sports and had some level of familiarity with it. Back in the 90s, this is what happened with Street Fighter II. With these long lines, 2 players would fight in a best 2 out of 3 match. The winner gets to stay as their credit lives on, while the loser walks, having to mope back to the end of the line if they still have money to perhaps try again. The next challenger would then walk up to the machine, eager to take down the reigning champion. Again, with the limited money you had to play games, you were eager to make your credit last. It wasn't just an ego boost to take down opponent after opponent, but it meant that you could stay at the arcade longer as well. You wanted to be the champion, where a line formed behind you, just itching to try to take you down. Playing this game, everyone behind you would be watching for the outcome, invested in the match, and possibly even hollering and cheering. The excitement was palatable in both playing and watching these battles. I have so many memories playing these games throughout the years. Fighting games would often bring the onlookers so impressed with your skills that they would pause their own gaming just to watch your feats. It always felt particularly awesome when you sensed somebody stop, turn their head, and start to watch, because what they were seeing was so impressive that it was better than playing a game themselves. Sometimes you might even get cheers when you command an audience. It was great to take out an entire line of challengers. These fighting game arcade machines were literally everywhere when they were hitting critical mass. There was a time where a kid spent $30 in an attempt to beat me at Virtua On. Not really a fighting game, but still a game that allowed one-on-one mech combat, where we were in separate cockpits, so we couldn't see each other's faces. I could only hear the grunts and frustrations as he tried time and time again to defeat me. My friend Nate was starting to get exhausted, waiting for my 1 credit to finally be done. Number 5. Arcades were a great place to unwind and find inner peace. When I first started driving, arcades were winding down on their last leg, but some of the more successful ones managed to stick it out for a few more years. As a new driver, but still a kid, with my now divorced parents, I was still visiting my dad on some weekends. I had a lot of angst and frustration at the time. When I was at my dad's, the friends that I had nearby were limited, and sometimes I just wanted to be alone. My dad would turn into bed early, while I've always been and always will be a night owl. Eventually, I came to the realization that, hey, when I'm visiting, I can just drive myself to the nearby arcade that I used to visit all the time growing up as a kid. I used to go there with my dad as a younger child. I would start going there sometimes, late at night, alone. You might think it's sad in some ways, but I found the experience cathartic. Finally being in full control of where I'm going and how I get there. I was able to get away from all that bothered me, and I was able to go to this nostalgic environment that I felt at home in. The atmosphere was dark, appropriate for an arcade of this style, and you could sink into the background if you wanted. I was around people, but not necessarily forced to deal with them if I didn't want to. There was no judgment or negativity. I could play a mixture of old classics and the new limited number of cutting-edge titles that were still coming out. It gave me a chance to think and basically find a sense of inner peace. I wonder now if the people surrounding me were similar lost souls like I was. My favorite title to play at that time was Virtua Fighter 4. It just came out and was the only way to play this latest game. I had my own money at this time, and I spent a lot of it sharpening my skills on that title. The arcade was exactly the place I wanted it to be as I escaped my teenage frustrations. Unfortunately, it did eventually close down, and I still think about it quite often. Wrapping up, There are so many great arcades that I've seen over the years. Not every arcade was amazing, but if you lived close enough to a city, there was enough of them that you had your pick of the litter. They permeated every mall, restaurant, bowling alley, roller rink, laser tag arena, laundromat, and more. They were everywhere. I still remember a series of intense matches of Versus Excitebike I had at a Pizza Hut when my age was but of only a single digit. There have been some really amazing, over-the-top, spectacular arcades that I've seen over the years. I went on a student trip throughout the UK when I was young, just before high school, where we visited a multi-level arcade in London, which was just amazing. Disney Quest in Florida really stands out in my mind the one time I went to Disneyland as a child. Even the arcade that was in the amusement park one state over is particularly memorable to me. While arcades are mostly gone, with only a few exceptions and some barcades that have popped up, there really are still some cool places that I would have loved as a child. Each generation ultimately does have its pluses and negatives. Tabletop gaming stores, places to play collectible card games, and LAN gaming centers have spurred in popularity. The arcade, though, in its 90s state, was unique and special with a culture that I loved. In the comments, I would love if you could share some of your memories of your favorite local arcades, your favorite games to play in the arcade, or if you're younger, any places that you visit today that you think might sound similar. If you've gotten this far in the video, I hope to read your thoughts, and I would love to share the positive vibes. Also, please be sure to like this video and subscribe as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.